Has a teacher, a choir director, a YouTube video, or literally anyone else in your life ever told you to sing from the diaphragm? Of course they have. We all have. And did you nod along? Maybe try to push your stomach out a little and have absolutely no idea if you were doing it right? Here's the thing. The diaphragm is physically incapable of doing what they're asking it to do. And once you understand why, breath support, one of the most confusing topics in all of singing, actually becomes pretty simple. Welcome to the Voice of Science podcast, where we dive into the science behind all things singing and teaching. Here, you'll learn how the voice works and discover practical tips to train it more efficiently. I'm Drew, and today we're dismantling one of the most repeated and most misunderstood pieces of advice in all of vocal pedagogy. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start with the anatomy, because this is where the whole myth falls apart. The diaphragm is a large dome-shaped muscle at the base of your rib cage. It forms the floor of your chest cavity and the ceiling of your abdominal cavity. When it contracts, it flattens and descends. That descent creates a vacuum that draws air into your lungs. That's inhalation. Here's the critical detail. Exhalation, the breath you actually sing on, happens when the diaphragm relaxes, not contracts. Relaxes. The diaphragm and everything it displaced during inhalation spring back towards their resting position, and that recoil pressure is what pushes air out of your body. So when someone tells you to support from the diaphragm, they're asking you to consciously control a muscle that is, at best, passively releasing while you're singing. And there's a second problem. Even if the diaphragm were an exhalation muscle, which it isn't, it's involuntary. You cannot directly isolate and command it. You can think, I'm going to breathe now, and the diaphragm responds, the same way your heart rate increases when you need it to. But you're not actually piloting it. You're making a general request, and your nervous system handles the rest. So where did this phrase come from? For a long time, in the right context, it was actually good advice. In classical singing, a deep diaphragmatic breath is genuinely beneficial. The laryngeal lowering that comes with it is part of the style. A lower larynx contributes to the tonal character and projection approach that classical technique requires. So, sing from the diaphragm worked. It produced results in classical studios, got passed from teacher to teacher, and became standard advice across the board. What never happened was the update. As contemporary commercial styles, pop, rock, musical theater, became the dominant forms of singing being taught, the advice kept getting handed down without the context that made it useful. In styles where a lowered larynx works against you and where breath requirements are completely different, that advice doesn't just stop being helpful. It can actively create problems. The phrase survived transition. The explanation of when and why it applies didn't. So we've established what breath support isn't. Does breathing actually matter for singing? Yes, enormously, just not the way most people think. Here's how I define it. Breath support is the voluntary physical activity of regulating exhalation to manage subglottal air pressure. Subglottal pressure is the air pressure below your vocal folds. It's the force that builds up and pushes the folds apart, causing them to vibrate and produce sound. Your vocal folds don't care how you got the air there. They care about the pressure and how consistently you deliver it. Breath support is the system you use to control that delivery. And here's something that surprises almost every singer. Your body is probably already producing enough pressure most of the time. You are not short on air. A bit of voice science nerdery. According to a 2020 study by Trazer and colleagues, singing requires subglottal pressure of roughly 5 to 35 centimeters of water. Maximal inhalation, just a full breath with no additional effort, produces around 30 centimeters of recoil force. Fancy, right? That means at the peak of a full breath, you're already inside the maximum pressure range for singing before you've done anything extra at all. For a bit more context on just how much pressure is available, a 1993 study by Fitz and colleagues measured maximum respiratory pressure in average healthy adults, up to 204 centimeters of water. Trumpet players who spend years training their breath under high resistance can produce up to 288. That's more than 8 times the maximum subglottal pressure your voice ever needs. You are not running out of pressure. The problem is never not enough air. The problem is almost always how that pressure is being managed. Too much being released too fast, or not enough muscular engagement to slow it down and deliver consistently. While we're here, let's address the related idea that a bigger breath is always a better breath. Relaxing your abdominal muscles allows the diaphragm to descend further, which increases lung volume. That's true. But whether that's useful depends entirely on what you're singing. In classical styles, long phrases, no amplification, large halls, there's a genuine reason to take larger breaths. The physics of projecting over an orchestra without a microphone changes the equation. In contemporary commercial music, pop, rock, musical theater, anything with a microphone, phrases are typically only a few beats long. You're catching breaths constantly throughout a song. A maximum breath is not only unnecessary, it's often counterproductive. The more air you take in, the more elastic recoil your lungs, ribs, and surrounding structures are putting back on that air. There's a useful principle from physics called Hooke's law that describes this relationship. Roughly speaking, the more you inflate an elastic structure, the greater the force it pushes back with. Double the volume, and you roughly double the recoil force working against you. That means double the muscular demand on your breath support before you've sung a single note. More tension, more pressure to manage, more work. All for a phrase that only needs a fraction of it. There's also a secondary effect I briefly touched on earlier. A deep diaphragmatic breath causes the larynx to lower. For classical styles, that's frequently desirable. It contributes to a particular tonal character. For many contemporary styles and higher note ranges, a lowered larynx is one more thing to compensate for. The big breath creates a chain of adjustments that are just unnecessary if the phrase doesn't require it. Take the minimum breath that gets you cleanly through the phrase. That's usually the right breath. So if it's not the diaphragm, you're not forcing air, and you don't need a maximum breath, what are we actually doing when we support the voice? The answer is the muscles that manage your thorax during exhalation. The external intercostal muscles, the pectoral muscles, and the lats. When these engage, they resist the natural collapse of the chest cavity during exhalation. That resistance slows the release of air, which gives you control over subglottal pressure, which is what lets you sustain a long phrase, build to a high note, or sing dynamically without running out of voice halfway through the line. Breath support is the act of keeping those muscles engaged as you exhale through a phrase. And the key word there is engaged, not gripping, not bearing down, but not passive either. One of the most useful ways to think about it is as a gradient rather than a switch. It's not on or off. Think of it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being completely absent, 10 being every ounce of muscular engagement you have. Most conversational singing in comfortable mid-range phrases might only need a 3 or a 4. A sustained high note or a demanding belt passage might ask for an 8 or a 9. The skill isn't just learning to engage, it's learning to find the right number for what the music is asking for, and to move between them fluidly. That's what's actually being trained over months of practice. Here are 3 exercises I've used in my studio for years. Each one gives you a different way to find and develop that engagement. Exercise 1. Fists in the ribs. Make fists with both hands, palms facing up, and press the pinky finger each side of the fist firmly into your lower ribs, one on each side. That specific orientation puts the contact point right against the external intercostals. You'll feel a bracing sensation spread through the chest and into the lats. Now, sing a phrase while maintaining that pressure. That muscular engagement, that feeling of holding against your own fists, is what breath support feels like. The fists are training wheels. Once you know what activation feels like, you can recreate it without them. A lot of singers find this one immediately clicks in a way that years of sing from the diaphragm never did. Exercise 2. Arms up expansion. Take a full breath and raise your arms up and out to your sides in a star pose, arms wide, chest open. Feel your rib cage expand and stay open. Now, try to hold that expanded feeling as you lower your arms and exhale through a phrase. Repeat 3 to 5 times. You're training the ability to keep the chest from collapsing early during exhalation. That's exactly the physical behavior breath support requires. Exercise 3. Squats on the hard notes. This one sounds strange, but stay with me. If you have a specific high note or ascending leap where your breath support consistently disappears, where the tone thins out or the sound gives, try doing a squat or a plie on exactly that note. The engagement of your legs and abdominals stabilizes your whole system and gives your voice something to push against. Singers who try this are almost always surprised by how quickly the note locks in. It's a useful bridge while you're building the muscular habit. Most singers know something is off before they can name it. There's a vague sense of effort in the wrong place or a note that keeps coming out differently than intended. That feeling usually has a cause, and once you know what to look and listen for, the diagnosis gets a lot faster. The first thing that tends to show up visibly is neck muscle engagement. When the thoracic muscles aren't doing their job, the body doesn't just stop, it finds pressure wherever it can. And what's immediately available, right next to the instrument, is the neck. You can see the muscles start to stand out, particularly during demanding phrases or high notes. That might read as intensity or effort, but what it's actually telling you is that support has dropped and the body is compensating upward. The problem with neck muscles taking on this job is that they contribute to a narrowed vocal tract and restricted laryngeal movement, exactly the opposite of what you want. Everything that needs to stay free starts to tighten. The second visible sign is a chin quiver, a rapid, regular vibration that can look almost like vibrato. It's so consistent. That's a different group of muscles being recruited, closer to the floor of the jaw. Same cause. The body found pressure elsewhere because the right muscles stopped providing it. Acoustically, the first symptom is usually pitch. Before strain is audible, before anything sounds dramatically wrong, pitch starts to drift. Advanced singers can mask this for longer through compensatory adjustments, but it's happening. By the time you actually hear constriction and strain, the support breakdown has typically been building for a while. The pitch instability came first. It was just harder to catch. From the singer's perspective, the experience tends to be, something feels off, but I can't quite put my finger on it. This is the most common description. What that usually means is the early warning signs are present. A little pitch drift, a little extra neck work, but they haven't progressed far enough yet to be obviously audible. Now you know what to look for before it gets that far. If you're teaching, there are a few patterns worth knowing, things that tend to look the same across students regardless of level or style. The big breath problem comes up constantly. Students arrive with it already in place before you've said a word. Maximum capacity, belly out, chest expanded. When you see the neck engagement come in or the chin quiver, 9 times out of 10, the breath is where it started. Running out of air mid-phrase is almost never an intake problem. It's a management problem. Redirect attention back to the intercostals, pecs, and lats. Take a smaller breath and go again. The body is doing what it can with what it has. We're just reminding it which muscles have the actual job. The 1 to 10 scale is a useful tool here. Ask a student to rate their support on the phrase that just broke down. Most will say a 2 or 3. Ask them to try it at a 6, then an 8. The goal isn't always to sing at maximum engagement. It's to develop range on the dial so the right number is available when the music asks for it. A student who's only ever sung at a 3 doesn't know what a 7 feels like, and that's exactly where the neck starts to do the work instead. Something worth being honest with students about. When breath support is genuinely working, when those muscles are engaged through a demanding passage, it is real physical work. Muscles will ache. On particularly intense material, you can work up an actual sweat. That might surprise a student who expects good technique to feel effortless. But tired intercostals after a session are a good sign. That's the workout. If anything, it's useful framing. This is athletic. Treat it like it. What a singer feels when it's working correctly? Well, there's an expansion in the chest that can initially feel like tension, which can be confusing. The muscles are engaging and tensing. That's accurate. But the result is control, not restriction. The signs that tell you it's right are more volume and intensity without more throat effort. Extra breath left at the end of phrases where there usually wasn't any. More stability on the notes that used to feel precarious, and more dynamic control across the board. Students tend to describe it as a thrill when it first comes together. That's an accurate description. One question that sometimes comes up: can you over-engage and cause a problem? Technically, yes. If you somehow sustained the expansion so completely that you overcame the return of the diaphragm, there'd be no pressure driving airflow and phonation would just stop. Before that extreme, if pressure drops below the minimum threshold, the fold needs to sustain vibration. The voice will creak out. But the practical reality is that this almost never happens. The voice self-corrects. The risk in breath support is almost always under-engagement, not over-engagement. Students shouldn't be afraid to really commit to the muscular work. On timeline, this is one of those areas where a singer can actually feel a real difference in session 1. I teach it in my first lessons because the results are so consistently immediate. The muscles are accessible. The exercises are learnable quickly, and the sensation of correct engagement is available almost immediately with the right cues. What takes time? typically months of focused practice, is making that engagement automatic rather than deliberate. And honestly, it never becomes completely automatic in the way some technical skills do, because it requires genuine physical effort. It stays something that asks for conscious attention, particularly during demanding material. Even experienced singers have sessions where support is lower than it should be, usually because focus was on something else that day. That's not failure, it's just the nature of a skill that lives in the body and costs something every time you use it. The goal isn't to make it invisible. The goal is to make it reliable. One of the hardest parts of working on something like breath support is knowing whether you're actually spending your practice times on the right things. You leave a lesson with a clear direction, and then a few days later, you're back in the practice room guessing, running the same exercises you always run because they're familiar, not because they're what you need right now. That's exactly what Practice Paths at voicescience.org is built to solve. It builds your practice sessions around how your voice is actually performing today. Not where your hope is, not what you did last time. You show up, it figures out the rest. There's a full 30-day free trial, no credit card required, and you'll be in the tools within the first 2 minutes. Check it out at voicescience.org. Let's pull it together. Breath support is the conscious regulation of exhalation to manage the air pressure your voice runs on. The diaphragm is an inhalation muscle that relaxes while you sing. It can't support anything. You don't need more air pressure. You almost certainly already have it. What you need to manage and extend the pressure you have using the muscles that can actually be controlled: the external intercostals, pectorals, and lats. Take the minimum breath for the phrase, not the maximum. Engage the thorax during exhalation. Resist the collapse. That's breath support. When it's not working, look for neck muscle engagement and chin quiver before you listen for strain. Use a mirror. It's super effective. Pitch drift is the early acoustic warning, and if something feels vaguely off but you can't name it, that's almost always what's happening. 3 exercises to build it: fists in the ribs to find the activation, arms up to feel the expansion, squats on the hard notes to stabilize. Expect to feel something different today. Expect it to take months to become automatic. And expect it to always ask something of you, because it's real physical work, and that's exactly why it matters. Thanks for tuning into the Voice Science Podcast. This is a refresh of our very first episode, and we hope it gave you something useful, whether you've been here since the beginning or this is your first time. If the diaphragm piece shifted something for you, share it with a singer who needs to hear it. Most people are still getting that advice every single lesson. Until next time, keep singing smart.